Thank you.
All right, so I just started recording it. And hi, everybody. My name's Adam Weissman. I'm a student at Flatiron, and this is an AMA, Ask Me Anything with Mark Daniel Delgado. Basically, the way that this came about is that I had been struggling with a lot of the labs. And what I got into the habit of doing was looking not only at the official solution code, but also looking at the forks. It was a really tedious process to go through fork by fork by fork. But as I went through over the weeks, and which turned into the months that I've been doing this, Mark's code really stuck out. Not only because it oftentimes it seemed even better than what the official solution was. So I reached out to ask him,
You're being very generous there.
No, for real. There was stuff. I sent him the message on Slack, and I was blown away. I was like, are you a genius, or is this something that anybody could do if they're dedicated? And I have good news for everybody that's here. I don't want to say you definitely could do it, but you probably can if you try really hard.
It's easier. It becomes easier.
It becomes easier, and I feel that my learning has been accelerated as a result of that conversation. So, Mark, do you have any opening comments that you want to make?
You guys can do it. No, welcome everybody. I guess I'm really excited. I've never had to do an AMA before, so hopefully you learned something. That's what this is about, sharing the knowledge. Hopefully, I can inspire one or two of you to, like if only one of you takes something out of this, then we did a good job. I'm happy. Yeah.
Excellent. All right. So we're actually really close to being right on time. The one thing that I just want to say for anybody that didn't read the blog, basically the essence of the secret is Mark would go through using the spec tests to guide him through all the code that he needed to do. So basically, it was sort of that natural curiosity of finding out, like, what is this spec test asking for, and then Googling to understand, following that thread to its natural end. Is there anything that you want to add to that before I start with the first?
No, it sounds right. That's exactly. I think after I figured out, because it wasn't like instant. I didn't figure it out instantly. It was probably a few sections in where okay, I know I coded this right, but it's not passing. Why is it not passing? And then it talked about how, I forget what it is, where like the RSpec tests or writing your own tests. Even one of the videos that I watched from Avi, he had on there where he was writing the test, and that's how he was developing a lot of the stuff that he was doing or that he was building. And after that, I started just looking through all of the tests. Like that was the first thing I would look at. Like, okay, excellent. How is this person thinking about it when he wrote the test? And then once it clicked, once that like, oh, this is what the test is asking, it was almost automatic. Like 2 or 3 labs done in less than an hour usually. Because like you said on your blog, it's probably the most advanced part of the whole course, because probably senior software engineers are probably writing these tests, and they have a goal in mind on how it should be built. And if you didn't build it that way, then you're probably not going to pass it. So really understanding what they're asking you and being able to look through all your notes or look back through all the stuff that you've already learned is huge. It's very huge. So yeah, I think once I figured it out, it was really, really like I started developing a lot of the stuff faster. So
Cool.
I agree with what you said.
Excellent. So for the first official question would be, how do you measure your learning progress? Like,
What do you mean by that?
so how would you quantify if the progress that you're making, like on you're learning something,
Mm-hmm.
is it that you're able to do it? Is that the standard measure, or do you look at it in some other way, or is it a combination of different things? Like, how do you know that you're
So,
getting better?
okay, I think I understand the question. Yeah. So I think one of the things that I do a lot is like I try to write it how I would write it, um, like and have it function the same way. You know what I mean? So there's a way that like certain solutions are written in like after you finish the lab or whatever. You didn't write it that way, for instance. Um, the way that I know, like I've learned this is that I look at the test, for instance, and then I know, oh, I need to do a migration for this. I need to do some type of association. I need to get this. I need to get this working on my views or whatever, right? Or like so being able to um, code it. I don't memorize like what I learn. I just know that I can Google it later. I just like as soon as like there's a tool that I know in my belt, it's there. I could just Google what it is, right? So for instance, right, if you're in Rails and um, you're doing some type of authentication or whatever, I don't remember how to do Omni authentication. I'm probably gonna Google that, but I know that I can do it. I know that I've written it before, and when I look back at my code, it's like, oh, all right, something clicks in my brain. I know how to code it. I know what the logic is like. I kind of know how it's gonna be done, and I don't really take too much. It doesn't take me long to kind of get there, if that makes sense. Like I would just know exactly how I would do it, but if I didn't know how to do it, it probably will take me like 2 or 3 minutes to realize that okay, there's no way I know how to do this right now, and then start learning what exactly I need to learn in order to get to that point where like okay, I know what this is asking me. Kind of going back to the test. If I don't know how to read the test or I don't know what the test is asking for from whatever the code I need to write, then I probably don't get it, right? And so from the test, I just look up, okay, what is this association, or what is I'm trying to find examples, but it's kind of difficult at this point because I'm like, well, I kind of understand that a little bit, you
That's
know?
cool. Does
Yeah.
anybody have any questions about anything that he just said? Like anything, kind of like a follow-up, anything specific to that point? If you have a question, please type it into the chat. I have a quick follow-up question if nobody has anything. How, if you're basically not memorizing anything
Right.
and you're Googling everything and you're getting used to that,
Mm-hmm.
right? I think that seems like something that would work very well when you're on the job or you're building a project or you're doing something.
Right.
But when you have to pass a coding interview, when you go in, let's say not, and it's a whiteboard session, and they say,
Right.
"Hey, whiteboard out this in Rails or JavaScript or whatever." Do you feel are you at a disadvantage, or do you prep differently for that?
Well, first of all, if you have an interview, congratulations. Um, get studying, because there are some interviews that you're going to go into where they don't let you Google stuff and you kind of have to figure out on your own. But some of them are very lenient, especially for like people who are just getting into the industry. Like one of my interviews, I've had a couple already where one of them were like, no, you can't Google anything. It's like, okay, cool. And so half my functions were literally like, well, I can't remember the exact thing that I'm looking at, or the exact method that I need, but I know there's a method to do this thing. It'll take me 2 seconds to Google or something like that, right? So I know conceptually what I need to do. I just don't know exactly. I don't remember how to do it just yet, right? And but yeah, if you have an interview, you gotta start studying, because like the better prepared you are, the better the interview process is gonna be. You're not gonna be stumbling around. And I have had some of those interviews where I just was not prepared. So take it from me, be prepared. But no, I don't think it hinders you. The big thing is like, if you know, then you know, and you could definitely Google some of these, especially on the job. I mean, my goodness. Like if you weren't allowed to Google, that would be so bad. I wouldn't work for that company.
Right. So GG wants to know, oh, that's a good one. What was the hardest part of the curriculum?
Redux. Hands down, Redux. And it's all front end, especially when you start messing with the asynchronous Redux. That becomes the most difficult part, because like that's the part where like everything kind of comes together, right? Like the people are interacting with your website, it's hard to test. That's the other thing. Like there's so many things on the JavaScript section. I'm pretty sure some of those sections were left kind of like figure out on your own, solely because there's so many different ways of implementing it. And I definitely experienced that with some of the, especially like the React Redux section. I remember specifically changing some of those tests, because I'm like, okay, I'm getting the exact thing that I need to get here. It's asking me for a specific variable that I didn't set to that variable that they called on the test. And so after I changed that, like once you understand, you understand. It's not like you understand but the test isn't passing. That's why it's so huge to like understand what the test is asking you, and be able to build something off of how other people are thinking. And so yeah, I would say Redux was probably the hardest.
Cool.
And it's very small part of it. Yeah, especially implementing that with React as well. There's a lot to keep in your head. And I encourage you guys to use the Redux dev tool and the React dev tool. They were very helpful.
So I have a question from Steven.
Okay.
And basically, it's did you consistently launch your lab apps and run through all the functionality of your code? And the reason he's mentioning this is because more than once he's passed all the tests only to launch the app and find it completely broken. And
I see.
And a quick follow-up, a side question that somebody had submitted on the survey that I had asked was, how would you deal with broken tests in general?
Delete the repo and then just fork it again. I definitely had to do that a few times. Or just delete the test. Like,
Right.
Like at the end of the day, you have to just make the project. And if you can make that project work and pass that technical part aspect of that, it means that you know what you're doing, right? The tests are just there to guide you. The test is basically a tool.
Excellent.
I know there's a few labs I skipped either because the forks were broken or like you said, the tests were just not working. They were not functioning properly. Like, and at some point you kind of have to Google like on your, the good thing about all this is that the error messages are very helpful, right? You could Google what those error messages are and fix the test yourself if you really wanted to. But as far as like writing code that works or code that like you come back that it passes the test but doesn't work on your computer, the way that I did it was I had two terminals running, one to run my Rails, because I'm assuming this is like Rails application, right? Because like the vanilla Ruby and all that stuff can be kind of like you can kind of figure it out pretty easily. But as far as like when you're starting building web applications, when you have a front end and you have a back end, you have the views and all that stuff. So I have two terminals running, one to like do the test, to test the actual test, and one that's running my actual server and checking to see the functionalities of those. So I'm doing both at the same time. So if you didn't know that before, you can run two terminals. You don't have to like X out of one of them to do your test, then run your server again. You could run two.
So the next question is from Gigi, and I'm going to combine it with the next question from the survey, where she wants to know, do you have a strategy to approach the labs, a methodological strategy? And the question that I'd like to combine that with, which sort of encompasses that, is what are your thoughts about setting goals versus systemizing a process for success? And just real quickly, is that question clear about goals over systematizing a process?
Um,
I guess the easiest way to clarify it is that
yeah,
when you're coding to pass a specific test and learn, that's a goal, right? But more of like saying, hey, like if the lab itself is broken and I got what I needed to get out of this, I'm just going to keep going on. That's more of like that's more of the idea of a systems thinking as opposed to goals thinking.
I see. Well, I think there was only really like 2 or 3 tests that I didn't pass. Either because the fork's broken, but the goal is probably huge. I had set out from the very beginning to finish as quickly as possible, as quickly as I humanly possibly can get done. So in my mind, I was going to employ whatever strategy I had to get it done. Sometimes it was good to read the test. Sometimes it was really good to read the README. And sometimes it was a lot better to watch somebody on YouTube do it. So I really had to grab as many resources as I can and pool them all in one direction. Also, being able to Google effectively is probably one of the bigger things, right? So one way of doing it is like I have a question, right? And then you have like 10 different Stack Overflows or 10 different blog posts. I just do control click, 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 and open all the tabs and then read which one kind of speaks to me at that point that I understand. Like if it's a YouTube or if it's a blog post or if it's the official documentation, I'll just click through every single one of them until I'm like, okay, that's what I'm looking for. I think that'll help me. And so it makes it easier when you know that like you're not just limited to the Learn platform, because there's so many things like that they don't teach that eventually you're going to have to learn anyway as a software engineer, that like you're going to have to get used to it, is what I'm saying. Get used to pulling as much resources as you can to learn something as effectively as you can, because not this curriculum is not going to have all the answers to all your problems. There's going to be errors that you're not going to encounter, and you can also use the ask a question tool. So that's kind of how I did it. If I was really stuck, I would really like ask for help. But odds are the questions that you're asking to yourself now was probably asked a long time ago, and it was answered a long time ago.
Right on. So a few questions from the audience. Sorry, do you have a favorite online resource, or just basically all of what you said, YouTube, Stack Overflow?
I got used to reading the docs, the API docs. So, and learning to navigate that. But as far as like ultimate resource, probably YouTube.
Cool.
And another pro tip on YouTube, if you haven't already, okay, there is this tool that I forget the name of it, but you can actually speed up I know YouTube already has like the 2x speed or whatever. So if you're learning how to code and like clearly you have a project on the side that you have, and this is like a 40-minute video, you can watch that whole thing in 20 minutes and still get everything out of it by like doing the 3x speed or 4x speed. At this point, I can't even watch a tutorial anymore at not 3x speed. But because for the most part, like when people are talking and explaining stuff, it's kind of slow. But it's kind of like reading an audiobook, and you're like, oh, okay, I'm gonna speed this up. So it's the same thing. Like when you watch YouTube videos on people learning stuff, you condense 10 minutes into 3, and you'll still get a lot out of it. You could always rewind. You could always pause and stuff like that.
Excellent. Another question from the audience. This is actually a question that I had asked him as well. Did you have any coding experience before Flatiron?
Not any formal ones. I knew how to like use Python. I learned Python for fun before actually doing full stack.
This is
the Ruby part was pretty simple.
Pretty simple,
I guess. Yeah.
And I know, so for people that are here and don't know, Mark is currently a chemist. So there was one question on the survey that I was wondering about. People had a concurrent question, but if the idea of phase transitions is unfamiliar to anybody here, it's basically, I'm going to do a really bad job explaining it. It's basically at a certain temperature, water is no longer water, it's ice, or it's a gas. And if the idea of a phase transition is when something crosses that threshold. So I was curious if your background as a chemist and that idea of phase transitions affected the way you think, the context of
nope.
Nothing like that.
No, I had the sole purpose of getting this done as quickly as possible. That's what drove me to learn it. And I kind of had this idea that like, okay, I can't provide any more value to my company as a chemist. I have to find something else. And so that's where kind of the coding journey started. There's a question here I actually want to answer, because it says, could you speak a bit about your daily schedule and how much time you're putting on your daily/weekly basis to keep up the timeline you kept? Tell you right now, my schedule sucks. Like for the last 5 or 6 months, maybe 80 hours, at least 80 hours a week. It's not sustainable. I don't what do you call this? I don't encourage it. But what I will say is that I think that being able to grind that out the way that I did, it really forced me to kind of look for ways to get better at coding, or get better at um, getting through the labs, or get better at learning. So I learned different ways on like what worked for me. So having that timeline really did push me to explore what I didn't know before, or like certain tactics that I haven't done before, right? And so I guess all the secrets out now. But yeah, it was pretty bad. The schedule is not great. I can't wait to start working just as a software engineer. That would be fantastic.
So another question from the channel is, did you graduate before or after the new V8 version was rolled out?
After. Okay. Yeah, actually the V8 swapped while I was in the middle of it. So yeah. But I think, like if you can crank it out in like 30 hours a week with some of the stuff, there's no reason why like anybody should be doing this more than 5 months, something like that. If you can devote that much time to it and like really like use your focus energy to like get stuff done, it's doable. It's hard, but it's doable. Yeah.
As a follow-up from one of the survey questions, is that how did you investigate and understand your strengths and weaknesses? Sort of to the point that you were just talking about, like how did you use what you learned to improve and further gain momentum? You had mentioned momentum early on, so
right.
Talk more about that.
Yeah. So when I first started the program, I just like everybody, I don't know how the learn submit works. I didn't know how the terminal works. I didn't even know what a CLI was, right? So I'm sure everybody in here can relate to when I say like, oh, I've spent 2 hours that only needed like a comma or a period, or like I misspelled my variable or something like that. So because you look back at some of your code and you realize, man, I missed so many little stuff, right? But you spent so much time missing those little stuff that you effectively basically shortened your time for learning other stuff. And I'm not huge on wasting time, not for me anyway. So I had to be really conscious about that. That's why I'm like, okay, I identified what are my time wasters, and I identified like, okay, I only have about a good amount of focus energy a day, and so if I can get myself in that mode really quickly and not be distracted with a lot of stuff, it was going to be a lot easier for me to learn and improve the way that I was doing this stuff. And so by trial and error, I started doing, right, like, okay, let me just code this before reading the README or something like that, right? Let me just do learn test and try to pass the test by themselves just through the CLI. Okay, it's asking me this, blah, 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 right? And then eventually towards somewhere in between, like I think it was the Sinatra section. Once I got to the Sinatra section, I pretty much got it. I laid it all down, like what I needed to do. It was like, okay, go to the test, read the test, write stuff down that I don't know, and start looking up those stuff that I don't know. Right, like associations at that point. I didn't know what they were. So I read them. I went to the Google Doc, or I went to Google. I did YouTube. I did all sorts of stuff to help me master that, in like the stuff that I didn't know. Like the first time that I'm hearing about it, like I just Google as much as I can. And then once, maybe after 10 minutes of doing that, I look at the question again and I'm like, okay, I think I know how to solve this. I'm gonna start trying to solve it from this point forward. And once you kind of get in that mode, at least for me, once I figured that out, I think I gave myself maybe 15 minutes on a lab if I couldn't figure something out in the lab, and I couldn't ask effective questions on Stack Overflow or then I would reach out to somebody, like reach out to somebody, because odds are you're probably looking at something you're overlooking it, and it's right in front of you, but another person's probably going to see it.
Right.
So don't be afraid to reach out to somebody early. Like,
right.
Don't wait 2 hours,
Yeah, and to that point, I think on the channel, Sarah mentioned use AAQ, ask a question as much as you can. I mean, if you can't do it, that's what they're there for.
Right. They've been very helpful a couple of times, for sure.
Cool. So are there any, I guess this is maybe a weird question, but are there any intuitions about software engineering that come easily? And on the flip side, is there anything difficult? I guess, like, is there anything that you just encounter and it's, oh, I get it. And then there's other stuff where you're just like, why doesn't this make sense?
Okay, I'll tell you this one. This one it wasn't so much like everything came to me. It's that I think I thought about it a lot, and I tried every possible thing that I could. And when something still doesn't make sense, like I'm there scratching my head. And this was when I was first learning the fetch API for the JavaScript. I'm like, man, I can't access any. Like, what the heck is a promise? Like, what is this? What is asynchronous? And then, like I was going to the dictionary, asynchronous. Okay, that doesn't help. And so as far as intuitions that come easily for me, it's very hard to tell. It's very hard to tell now because I've learned so much already that, like, I could easily say, oh, everything came naturally to me, but that would be a lie, right? One thing that really gave me a hard time was Redux gave me a really hard time, and asynchronous part of JavaScript gave me a hard time.
What was it about the Redux in particular that you found? Oh, Mark, hold on a second. I think I muted you by accident.
Oh, sorry.
All right, keep going. Sorry about that.
Oh, it's all good. I think like not being able to access certain things the way like asynchronous code would be. So it was a different way that I had to think about some stuff. Like I had to really like consciously flip the switch in a lot of ways where, like, okay, my code is doing one thing and I wanted to do this other thing, right? So my code is executing line by line, but for some reason my console log isn't doing the thing that I wanted to do. So I think a huge part of it was I just asked a lot of questions to a lot of people that I knew was already that knew their stuff. And so I wasn't going to waste time on like, hey, do you know how to do this? And it's like, oh, I'm in that same boat as you, like definitely find somebody, because there's going to be somebody out there that knows a lot more than you. And don't be afraid to say like, hey, I don't understand this. Can you explain this to me? Because I remember I asked one of my friends like, hey, can you explain to me how asynchronous really works or whatever? And, I believe the analogy that Learn gives was like the waiter or something like that. And, that analogy wasn't like all that great to me, I think it was a chef. I don't even remember, but definitely find like an analogy that works for you, because it's different for everybody. Some people are geniuses and they can figure it out in like 10 seconds. I definitely had to ask like some stupid questions, right? Like, well, if I'm fetching doesn't that mean that it's running like line by line or whatever, right? Something like that. And if you haven't gone through the fetch API yet, you'll know what I mean. And the other thing with the Redux was just, I think, the volume of how much I had to remind myself how Redux works was the hard part. But once I got over that, it was like, okay, I know how to do this. And then combining the two together, that was even worse. Yeah. So if I can't solve something in my head really quickly, it means that like there's a glaring weakness in there somewhere, and I have to find a way how to get around it. That's basically my rule. If I don't know it after looking at it, it's like, yeah, I don't know it.
As a sort of follow-up question, well, does anybody have any follow-up questions? Again, if you have any questions, please post them in the chat. A follow-up question that I have to that is that if everything, in the event that everything was going smoothly,
Mm-hmm.
was there ever some sort of cue where you're like, okay, everything's going smoothly, but whoa, like I can do this better? Would you ever check yourself, or if things were going well, you wouldn't reflect?
That's a good question. Okay, I did this once. So you know how like you build on top of what you already wrote from the previous lab usually? They usually do that. So what I would do is I would delete the whole thing and see if I could remember how to write all the stuff, what I was thinking at that point. And, kind of like retype what I already typed to kind of ingrain in my mind that I know this. Like from memory, right? It's like, oh, what was that method? I think it's this, right? So stuff like that. I think if things are going smoothly for me, I think the biggest thing is that you're able to kind of play around with it without breaking the test, right? Like, oh, what if I wanted to add another feature here? Let's see if I can do it myself. Something like that. So I would do that almost all the time, actually. I would add like other code that isn't necessary to pass a test, just so I can prove to myself that I do understand this. Like, okay, for example, I need to add a button that adds the counter, whatever, right? Like adds the counter. Okay, if I understand this, I should be able to add another button that decreases this counter, or starts a timer, or something like that, right? Because that's the only way you can convince yourself that you're doing it correctly, is that if you can create stuff out of your own. And so I definitely did that a couple of times.
Excellent. One of the submitted questions from the survey is could you talk about pair programming at Flatiron or in general? And do you have any tips about doing it effectively or not effectively, for that matter?
I'll be honest with you, you're the only one I ever did paired programming with, so I can't really speak to how good it is. But I think okay, this is gonna sound really weird, but like, you have to pick somebody smarter than you. I know that sounds like, well, how do I find that person, right? Because that's ultimately what happened to me, is that I just called up my buddies who knew how to do certain things, and I just told them like, hey, can you take a look at what I wrote, see if you have any feedback or whatever. As far as pair programming, I don't know. I can't really speak to it because I didn't do it very much. Sorry.
For the one time that he's talking about, where we pair programmed, it was the way that it worked, and it worked really well for me, was he was like, let me show you how my process works. And he says, just open up, whatever lab, and then we'll just go through it. And essentially, he kind of like it was like looking over my shoulder, the way that like an expert, it wasn't really a pair programming to the extent that we usually do it when people are doing a code challenge and people are just kind of like the blind leading the blind, being like, what should we do? What do you want to do? I have no idea. It was more like the tests were guiding me, and he'd be like, well, what are you going to do? Or what do you think? Like, you want to look that up. A quick aside from the chat, Sarah, she's already finished the program. She recommends pair programming, a great way to learn new methods and how other people process their logic. And you'll learn how to get the same solution in a different way than you normally would.
Oh, that's a great
point.
That's a great answer. Yeah.
And also,
I agree with that.
And there's
listen to Sarah, everybody.
And Danielle actually also finished the program. We're probably gonna like ask them some questions too. So we also have, okay, so before we turn this into more open discussion, I think that like there's a lot of the main questions have been asked. So I want to find out, before it gets to the end, how can the audience help you, Mark? For example, are you looking for a soft introduction to somebody at company X? I mean, it's a offshot. Maybe there's somebody here that can recommend you.
How can you help me? Well, I don't know. I wasn't really thinking about other people helping me, but hey, if you guys need any help, holler at me. If I'm available, I could help a lot of you guys out. But I'm looking for work in Seattle right now. So if anybody knows anybody in Seattle, I'm looking for work here. It's kind of weird right now because Seattle's empty. Everybody's staying inside.
Cool. So,
yeah, Sarah's looking for somebody in Toronto. So if anybody has any.
So a few kind of wrap up questions, and then we'll just kind of have a more general thing. What question should I be asking you that I didn't? Was there anything that you wanted to answer that you were hoping you would get asked? Anything that you feel like that we should ask ourselves?
I think the goal, I'll say this, right? The most important thing is like figuring out what's important to you, right? And really following through on what's important to you. Because if it's important for you to finish this in 7 months or 8 months or whatever, stick to that. You know what I mean? Like, and come up with a plan to get it done, right? I know when I was going through it, there was definitely moments where I said, no, there's no way I can do this. I can do this in 4 months. Like, but I was already finishing a huge chunk of it by 3.5 months. And it only took me like a week and a half to finish the React and Redux section, which was like amazing. Yeah, so really being able to set a goal and sticking to it, and putting yourself in like an uncomfortable position to learn what you didn't already know before. But the goal is really important. You got to have that. Otherwise, you like, if once you get stuck, it's really easy to give up. It's really easy to kind of be like, oh, let's do that tomorrow. And then you're losing all your momentum. And, I mentioned earlier that momentum is key. So like the more wins you can get in a short amount of time, the better your experience will actually be. So yeah, not saying I'm perfect. There were definitely days where I'm like, nah, I don't want to do this. This is stupid.
Right.
But, but to me, it was really important that I finish as quickly as humanly possible, at least for my schedule. Right. So I kind of made that like, okay, this is really, really important. Like anything else is a failure kind of thing. But even my failure was still faster than most people. Right. So like, let's say I finished in 5 months, I wouldn't be so upset at myself.
Excellent. So we have 2 other students who actually already graduated, Danielle and Sarah. And I'd ask you guys, Danielle and Sarah, to unmute yourselves. And if there's anything that Mark said that you as former students would like to second or anything like that, I just want to find out what your opinion is.
Yeah, sure. I think that, first of all, everybody going through this program is doing amazing things. Everyone is doing, coming at this from a different perspective with different time constraints, different kind of responsibilities. So it's really, really tough, and y'all are doing really big things. So congratulations, first of all. Secondly, setting goals. It's really good to set goals, but you also have to give yourself enough space to forgive yourself when you don't make the goals, because the point is to learn. The point is to understand the code that you're building. So you can make a goal to complete a section by a certain time, but if you don't understand that section of code that you've written, sure, you've hit your goal, but your real goal is to learn and to understand what you're doing. So if you have to go back if you did a lab and you're like, well, I got the test to pass, but I don't really understand, go back, spend an extra day. It feels badly when you're not hitting the goals that you want to make, but if you don't understand it, you're going to regret it later. It's worth taking the extra time and then maybe adjusting your goals and saying, well, I didn't hit that. Maybe I should adjust my goals for this section. Maybe I need to adjust my goals for this section. It's about adaptation, because the whole point of this is to understand what you're doing. That's what the resources are here for. Also, I agree what Mark was saying, ask for help. Don't wait for 2 hours. If you're stuck on something, if you feel like you've gone through all the test samples, cases, and trying to figure it out, ask questions. You don't even necessarily have to go through Flatiron. You can go through other avenues to get help. Just reach out. There's people who are willing to help.
Right.
And yeah, I think the biggest point is that you're learning, and to allow yourself to learn and to understand what you're doing. Don't rush through. That was my thing. And Redux is hell. Redux gives me a hard time. I got held back.
See, I'm not the only one.
Yeah, Redux was hell. I got held back in the React section. I felt really poorly. I felt like I messed up and that I was dumb and that like I wasn't doing things in enough time. But honestly, going back to do React again was the best time spent, because now React's my favorite. I understand it. So
that's a really good point.
Take the time that you need to take to learn the things. Don't just pile through. Don't feel badly because, oh, I wanted to get through this part in a month and I haven't, so I have to rush through. Do not rush through the material. Understand your learning patterns and learn the material. That's my biggest piece of advice.
That's great advice.
Thank you.
Yeah. Don't listen to me. That was great.
I agree with Danielle, and I was self-paced. So Danielle she went to the campus. Which campus did you go to again?
Brooklyn.
Okay, yeah, I forgot. So she actually went to like in person, but I was also self-paced. I started hoping to try to finish it within 6 months. I didn't. It took me just over a year to finish because I worked full-time the whole time. And I took vacations because I needed the mental breaks because it was just too much. And I did feel bad that I didn't hit my 6-month goal. But at the end of it, I learned a lot more, kind of like going back and slowing down my pace. And I took a break from Flatiron curriculum for a bit and did some like Udemy courses to kind of solidify everything I was learning. V8 has a better JavaScript section now. I did V7. The JavaScript section was not good. So I took a break from the curriculum and did other things too. So really, like Danielle was saying, the goal is to learn. You want to understand stuff, and don't beat yourself up if you don't understand it as well as you would like to, because even after graduating, I still feel like I don't know what's going on. Danielle just started a job recently last week. She still feels like she doesn't know what's going on.
I have no idea what's happening. No idea.
That's encouraging.
It's just this is the career that we've chosen. Ongoing learning, always Googling, always feeling like we're not sure, chasing new technologies. So if you're feeling confused and feeling like you're not getting it, even after you graduate, sorry to say, you're going to have that feeling even when you get a job. It's just part of the software engineering industry. So it's okay to feel like you don't really understand. And Adam, you were mentioning earlier about whiteboarding, stuff like that. I think obviously there's some interviews you can't Google, but I think a lot of times with whiteboarding and things like that, they want to know that you actually know, you're thinking through and you're talking through the problems. So talk about how you would do something, even if you forget a method, just like explain, I'm trying to iterate through this and this. And when you're talking through it, sometimes even if you can't write it, just talking is enough.
On another note, also, if I could just jump in your projects, comment your code, comment your code, comment your code, comment your code. You will have to go back. If you're going to put them on your resumes, you're not going to, you think, because you've spent so much time on this project. You're like, I'm never going to forget this. I know exactly, like you've gone through, you're going to remember, like, how could I ever forget this? You're going to forget. And you're going to have to walk through in an interview one of your projects, and you're not going to remember, and you're going to go, I remember struggling with this, but you're not going to remember why you did what you did. So comment your code, comment your code, comment your code.
Excellent. Thank you, guys.
That's great. That's great. See, they have better advice than I can give them.
No, it was great. I mean, everything is wonderful. Mark, I do have one more question. Where do you want
what's up?
Where do you want to be 5 to 10 years from now?
Oh, it's a hard question to answer. To be honest, I would really like to start my own business at some point. Or be in like some type of leadership role.
What do you? No, and the other question that I had for you is, what is your favorite thing about software engineering?
The fact that I could learn something and build something in 5 minutes. Like no other rush of euphoria comes. At work, okay. So yeah, being able to like conceptualize something and have it work is probably the best part of it for me. And I actually agree with all of what they're saying. I think part of the reason why I was able to get through it's because I understood a huge chunk of it as I was going through it. So yeah, don't feel like you have to rush through all of this stuff. Because when you don't understand it, it'll actually set you back the more you keep going down the hole as you keep going forward. So
there's one question that wasn't asked here, and it was just something that I remembered on the Slack channel, where Gigi was talking about looking at a Rails project, something like I don't know, like an Airbnb or whatever, and then trying to dissect the code to have a better sense of how that business was built. Like Twitch was also built in Rails. Do you have any thoughts or advice about dissecting something? Is it something that, have you done that, or do you think you would get value out of it?
So, absolutely, you get. So use the debugging tool. So when I first get into a code that I don't understand, I just use pry. I put pry on everything, and I just go enter until I understand what the logic is. Yeah. Or if they even have a test, I'd read the test. That's another thing. Yeah. So, but yeah, use your pry tool, pry and debugger for JavaScript. Put that all over the place, yeah, because it slows it down. It slows it down for you. You're like, okay, this part of my code works. This part doesn't work. I don't know why. Stuff like that.
Excellent. All right. Well, I think we finished at about 5 to 9. So does anybody, did I suck doing the AMA, or everything was all right? All right, cool. Thank you. And does anybody have anything else that they want to ask with 3 minutes to go?
Comment your code, comment your code, comment your
Oh
code.
my God. Okay. So I Zoom is broken on Linux, but I do have a question. I was able to solve the lab for this, but can anybody here tell me what the what the reason for using pry in the lab that it was introduced in was?
I think it's so that you can use it later.
It felt like they were trying to have you use it to solve a problem, but the answer was right in front of my face, so I never ended up using it.
I don't know. I use it quite a bit though. I use pry quite a bit. And print, puts, all that stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, excellent.
What's my favorite programming language or framework? I actually really like Redux a lot. I know it's weird. React and Redux is probably my favorite. My favorite programming language has got to be Python. It's just too good.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much. And this was recorded, so I'll post this. And Mark.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much for taking time to do this.
Hopefully my answers were satisfactory since it's on the internet forever. I'm going to look back at this 10 years from now and like, oh my God, I gave that advice. That's horrible advice. Why would anybody take that?
No, for posterity, it'll be awesome.
But yeah, you know what? It'll be a sign of growth.
Your
with
employees will grab clips from this. And
this is how not to do an AMA.
all right. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.